There we go. And let's go back to sort of going through those slides. So we've talked about ourselves for a bit, which is great. What are we actually talking about today? Well, as I said, it's all about matching user needs to tech capabilities. I wrote a little bit about this on the blog a couple of months ago, and there's a link there through to that. I assume you've all done your homework and read that before joining up here. And really, what's this about? Well, it's just really this super simple way of helping us to figure out the best, easiest, cheapest way to meet user needs by choosing the right technology that suits our context. So, and as described in the blog post, it's a really, really simple thing. There's no sort of magic here at all. It's simply taking a fairly simple grid and getting that filled in. So how does this actually help out? Well, it helps us by, first of all, making us put user needs at the center of our decision making around technology. It's always so tempting to leap into solutionizing and thinking what the really cool sort of tech is that we could be making use of. But it's really, really important always to put those user needs first. But it also helps to reinforce a message about the way that we think about technology, that actually a sort of a better way of doing it is to think about having individual tech capabilities that we can sort of reuse and redeploy across different services so that we're making best use of the stuff that we've got, so that things are easier to support. And there's greater opportunity for integrating services as well, rather than thinking about the fact that we need to have sort of single monolithic systems to do loads of different stuff. And both these things, at the end of the day, will help us make better and cheaper services. So when we're talking about user needs, what do we mean? Most of us will know about this, I'm sure, working in digital roles, but it's simply a way to document the outcome that your users need to get from your service. So it's user-centered and not organization-centered. So it's different from perhaps those lists of requirements that we might have been sort of writing a few years ago when we were thinking about technology. Instead, we're writing stories about our users and what they want to achieve. But of course, ensuring that user needs are met leads to services that end up being used by people because they like them and because they do what they want them to do. And then that then leads us oftentimes to being able to sort of meet the organizational objectives that we had as well, more often than not in local government, which means saving money. So how do we define user needs? It's really quite straightforward. There's a lovely way of doing this, this sort of pattern, which is as a, for instance, resident of the borough, I need to, what's the thing that they need to be able to do? Be able to park in the town centre, for example. Or sorry, I need to apply for a parking permit so that I can park in the town centre and go to work. So it's a relatively easy way of just articulating those. And again, there's an article on Sensible Tech there with a little bit of guidance and indeed some templates to help write user stories, which help us to define our user needs. So what do we mean by technology capabilities? Well, those are the essential building blocks of a digital service. And I've just picked sort of 10 here just to plonk down. That there probably are more, but these are some of the ones that we use more often than not. So publishing, so sticking stuff for people to read and look at on web pages, booking of appointments or objects like rooms and equipment and that kind of thing. We've got sort of being able to report things, whether it's a missed bin or some dog poo that needs collecting in the road or a pothole or something like that. Whether people want to pay for things, managing cases, sending notifications, whether it's by email or text, taking electronic signatures might be another one, things like web chat, people being able to upload evidence and documents and stuff, and the actual storage and management of those documents as well is another one. There are lots more, but these are some of the more sort of common ones that we're talking about. So when we speak about technology capabilities, those are the kinds of things we're talking about. And of course, what we find is in our organization is that if you made a list and a map of all your technology capabilities, you'll probably find that you've got lots of different ways of doing all of these things. And you're never probably going to get away from that. But it's a good idea to try and sort of rationalize down if you can. Because there's been quite a lot of talk about technology capabilities and capability-based sort of architecture. And sometimes, people have articulated dreams around, one day we could have just one way of doing bookings throughout the whole of our council, or even just one way of doing case management. Well, it's a bit of a utopia. It's a massive challenge to get there. But I think that what we can do, and part of what this method I think helps us to do, is to enable us to look at, to try and reuse what existing technology we've got whenever we possibly can, when we're thinking about meeting those user needs. So that's probably enough for the background around sort of what we're talking about user needs and tech capabilities. So when do we start sort of using this method? Well, let's just say you've just started work on a new project, which involves choosing and implementing a bit of new tech. You've managed to convince the service not to buy the thing that they really wanted to buy, at least not right away, because those of us working, in digital services know just how often, we get to that position where the solution is presented to us right away. But actually, perhaps we've managed to convince them to maybe we need to look into this a little bit more detail. But how do we actually find out what we need to buy, if anything at all? So rather than thinking in terms of needing necessarily a whole new system, the idea here is that what we break down the whole ask in terms of individual capabilities, and we do that by analysing the user needs. And then when you come to the end of this, what you might find is that you don't need to buy anything, or actually you only need to buy one or two small things that can then be knitted together with what you can already reuse to create something that fits in with your existing ways of working. Is probably going to be a lot easier to support, and hopefully will result in better digital services. So the method, and we're going to work through this in just a moment. You can kind of workshop this with post-its and things, or just use the table in the template to fill it in. But basically what we think about is, what are our user needs? We then sort of it helps sometimes to then convert those user needs into a slightly more task-orientated statement. Then describe what the tech capability might be needed to complete that task. Is it a form? Is it some case management? Is it payments? Is it notifications? And then the final thing that we can then do is note down the current ways that we already have to fill that capability. And like I say, quite often you're going to have more than one way of doing that. Occasionally, you'll have no ways of doing that. And that's the point where you might actually sort of need to buy something. And as I flashed up earlier on the screen, I've shared this very, very simple template as a way of sort of documenting this stuff. And there's a link there if you click through to a Google Doc version of this, which if you want, you can download into Word just to make your life a little bit easier. So that's the end of going through all of those slides. Hopefully that's useful sort of background, and we sort of knowing what it is that we're looking at here. So what I was going to do is, first of all, is just run through an example, which is the one that was used in the original blog post, but it might be helpful for us to talk through it together. And it's quite helpful, actually, given that I think Keelan and Nick, you're both looking at intranets, because that is the focus of this initial example. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll talk through a few of these user needs, and then the tasks, and then the tech capabilities, bung them into the template on the screen, and then maybe we can come up with some others, and then just sort of think it through in terms of how all that works. Does that sound okay? Great, fab. So I'm going to share my screen again, and this time I'm going to share. Can everybody see that okay? I hope you can. So this is just, I've just downloaded the template here into Word. I'm now going to start cack-handedly typing some stuff in. So as I say, we're going to be looking at, on this example, we're going to be looking at an intranet. So let's bung that up there so that we know what we're talking about. And just as an example of a user need, so let's just say, as an employee, typing, as an employee, I would like to know if my pay will increase next. Yeah. Okay, so what is the task? Well, I need to sort of quickly and easily access details of pay grades, increment policy. That on there. Now, what is the best way to do that? So if I'm going to be looking this stuff up, I guess probably tech capability is the ability to publish information web pages. So it's basically publishing in other words. And for the policy point of view, for policy, sharing or storing documents. Okay, and what might the tech options be there? Well, okay, let's just say that we're starting a new sort of intranet project there. It might well be that, for instance, we've got the corporate CMS. Could that be used as the way to publish internal pages of information like this? Maybe we're running some WordPress-based microsites or something. Could we, co-opt that bit of technology as a way of just publishing text on a web page? Or indeed, we could buy a new intranet. But we'll see if that's the right option. And then for sharing policy documents, well, you can upload to a CMS, a content management system. So whichever one we choose, you can always upload documents into those. Maybe we're in a Microsoft shop. So we've also got SharePoint, and SharePoint does some things quite well. And one of those things is storing documents. So, that's another thing that we could do there. So we're not necessarily, so you can see here, we're already starting to think about, actually, while folk might think we need an intranet so that we can publish internal documents, actually we're already sort of starting to say, actually, maybe you don't need an intranet to do that, because actually we've already got something that's quite good at sharing documents. And we just need to know how we can sort of make use of that in this instance. So let's just choose another quick one. So as I don't know, as a employee. I can't type that word, can I? As an employee working on site, I need to know what's for dinner at the canteen, just as an example. Okay, and again, so that means I want to quickly find information on the canteen menu. You'd be surprised how important this is to people, where there is a canteen anyway. And again, this probably looks like publishing, but it could actually also be that maybe, I don't know, sort of make our menus a specific capability. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's one for discussion. Anyway, publishing, CMS as above, we could put there. But also maybe in education, there's a school dinners app that could be reused. That's a slightly stupid example, but it's possible, isn't it? Okay, fab. So that's a couple of examples I've got there, some of which are sort of more useful, I think, probably than others. But no doubt others on the call probably have some things they could share. So does anybody want to come up with just another sort of user need that users of an intranet might have that we could start to think about in this way? Keelan or Nick, maybe, if you've been looking into this, what do people want to use an intranet for? Nick, are you trying to talk? I think you might just be muted there, mate. Anyone else, of course, can jump in if you want to. I'm not just putting pressure on the two intranet boys. Just while we're waiting there. So another example I think here could be, for instance, I need to know.
I know. I didn't see. I don't use Zoom, so I've got to check my flexi time balance.
Right. Okay. Yep. So yeah, as an employee, I need to check my flexi time balance. Marvelous. Oh, an employee. I need to do some sort of thing so that just types in for me, don't I? Or just avoid using it. Staff member. So again, so the task there is exactly that, isn't it? Really, it's just look up balance of flexi time. Okay, what's that tech capability, Nick, would you say?
Sorry, red at the moment via a third-party system.
Yeah, so it's the third-party system
for access via the intranet. There's a link.
Yeah, access third-party system access, and I suppose that things that to think about there might be things like single sign-on and that kind of thing, to make that as easy a process as possible. So again, how do we do that? A simple link from the intranet, or we could even start thinking about maybe if I just make that a bit smaller, so link from the intranet. The alternative would be potentially some kind of integration to staff dashboard or something like that. Perhaps if we wanted to start being a bit sort of flashier about this stuff, we could say, well, look, when people log into the intranet, if this is the thing that they're doing more than anything else, perhaps they just want to be able to just see that information as soon as they log in. Can anybody else think of some other thing that we might be able to think about in terms of, what are the various sort of user needs around accessing something like an intranet that we haven't mentioned already? So we've talked about accessing policies, we talked about accessing sort of general information and stuff like canteen menus and stuff. Other sort of common things around internal collaboration, communication that often gets bundled with an intranet. Can anybody think of anything else to chuck into that pot?
One of the ones that we had was seeing the structure of the organization.
So as a member of staff, I'm avoiding the word employee now. As a member of staff, I need to see the structure charts so I know who my boss is. Okay, so that's one there, and so in terms of that task, again, it's a relatively straightforward one. So easily view, and I think this is the important bit, up to date structure charts. And of course, once you start digging into these things, there's all sorts of other user needs then, which is like, as the person who has to update the structure charts every month, every time there's a restructure, how can I do that sort of quickly and easily? So what might some of the tech capabilities be here, Keenan? I mean, I can think of a few ways to do this quite badly, but what would be some things you're thinking about there?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get to capability level. So, I mean, at a simple level, like producing diagrams, like I was going to say like automatic generation of organizational structure charts. Like I think there's almost a specific thing around that.
Charts from the HR system. Yeah, absolutely right, and some kind of integration there. So again, if we're publishing diagrams, we could do the usual thing of maybe drawing them in Visio or PowerPoint and saved, or rather shared as sort of PDF. So it's stored on the CMS or SharePoint, say, just as an example. And then if we're looking at HR integration, well, what seventh circle of hell will that sort of involve? Probably, some kind of sort of development work on some kind of platform, perhaps that you might have Power Apps or something, I don't know. But anyway, you could, whatever the internal tooling is around that kind of thing, you could sort of put in there as well.
Microsoft Teams was kind of the obvious one there, I thought. Microsoft Teams does doesn't it? Because it gets pulled in from HR, puts the stuff into the HR system, updates into Active Directory, and then Teams generates a nice picture.
And all I will say is that, and if that matches your actual organizational structure, then I will, I don't know, eat something that tastes quite foul, because it very, very rarely works, but you never know, it might do there. So anybody got anything else that they'd like to sort of chuck into this one? Gosia, you've got one. We can't quite hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Thank you, and apologies. I was thinking around a training for employees, something around having a calendar integration and linking that to a booking system for training sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a member of staff, I need to find a book onto training. So that means providing. Need to provide a listing of training opportunities. System. Tech capabilities for that might be, obviously there might be, so there's like almost like a directory, I think is a kind of fairly well known sort of tech capability in terms of listings of stuff. Directory could do that, and then obviously then bookings is the next one that goes alongside that. Now this again is quite an interesting example, and thanks for raising it, because actually does this sit in the, so we could probably do this, so your intranet CMS may have directory publishing on there, but also it's likely that your learning management system is going to have something like that, and how do we link to that or integrate with it in some way, and what about the bookings? How do we do that? There's usually several different ways of doing it. So some of your existing line of business systems will do it. It might well be that your LMS has got it. You might have an individual bookings tool that's used corporately across various services, like the likes of Booking Bug and various other things like that.
Yeah, but if I was to be designing something around the booking system, I would like this that to be quite smart in a way that when the the maximum capability is reached, I wouldn't be able to book more people in. However, those booked in would get a kind of automated email sent to their inboxes with the invite, so there would be like zero human kind of interaction in the whole event of trying to get a training booked.
Yes, absolutely right. So we've got some other good stuff that people have been adding into the chat. I'm fine. One of the things I'm finding here is that flying solo on these things, you've got a lot of stuff to keep on top of. So we've got some folk putting in some good examples in the chat of things that we could do here. Task sharing about being able to find project updates, which again is a really interesting one in terms of where does that actually fit. You could very simply do that on an intranet with simply publishing web pages about this stuff and getting people to update them. But actually, is it better to have some kind of corporate portfolio management tool which has got reporting built into it and people can access dashboards there? Reporting IT faults and finding help, which is Carolyn's suggestion. Again, quite a good one. The balance here is always going to be, how much of that goes into the intranet, how much of that goes into your service desk tool, and oftentimes that will depend on how awful your service desk tool is, and how much people would actually want to interact and use that, and does it even enable you to have a really nice usable knowledge base that would help with that kind of thing. And May has also put there about booking a holiday. And again, oftentimes this is where intranets are so fascinating, I think, because they kind of, so much of the stuff gets put into an intranet system that perhaps belongs somewhere else. Booking holidays, is that part of the intranet or is that part of the HR system? Again, oftentimes it depends what your HR system's like and what it's capable of doing, and how easy it is to customize and things like that. So I could type all those examples into here, but all that would do is expose my appalling typing even more. But as you can see there, so in the space of just 10 minutes or something like that, we're already really digging into the whole thing that we're talking about here, which is around what are the actual things that people are going to be using your intranet for, or they think that they want to use an intranet for, and they're starting to think about actually the wide range of tech capabilities which you've probably already got within your organization that you might be able to start answering some of this stuff with. And I think some of these things are really interesting ones to get stuck into. And one of the big ones, I think, for me is the whole sort of policy document part of it, whereby, it's often the first thing that people say about an intranet is, well, everyone needs to be able to find our policies. But, what actually people want to find generally, I think, is answers to questions, isn't it? How many days holiday do I get? Am I going to get an increment this year? How many months notice do I need to give? And rather than sort of perhaps the answer those user needs is not to make it easy for them to download an extremely long PDF of an entire policy. It's just to give them the answer to the question that they've actually got, so that they can then sort of get on with resigning or booking a holiday or whatever it might actually be. But so it starts to make us think about this stuff, about how we sort of break down all of these services. Does anybody have, well, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? Is it can you still see yourselves sort of using that method? Perhaps I think it's often quite helpful when you're in discussions with a particular service area about these things at the beginning, to get them thinking a little bit more widely about, rather than just, oh, we need to buy a new intranet, or to actually say, well, actually, is that really what you need? What are the gaps we actually need to fill? How does that sort of relate to some of the conversations you have with colleagues and things about all this stuff? Yeah, Gosia? You need to pull your microphone down again.
Sorry, I think sometimes what people want is not necessarily what they need. And, having a kind of quick exercise like that would help them to understand what actually the core of identifying user needs is, rather than just simply saying, no, your idea is bad. So I would kind of use that kind of exercise to filter through the good ideas and try to actually understand what is the user actually needs, rather than what they want or what they think might work for them.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah, that's right. Tass, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just very briefly, like most councils, I imagine we have a problem where people have access to money and therefore they just go off and buy their own thing anyway. So we're just writing into our new, I can't remember, call it transformation steering group or something, the terms of reference, which is that absolutely no one is allowed to buy anything without it coming through IT. So then if that works, then having that sort of template would be helpful when you're actually looking at their, I don't know what they call it, early ideas document or something, because then you could actually say, oh, we already have that, we don't need to go and buy it at all. Stop spending 135 million pounds on something.
Absolutely right. Yeah, that's totally true, Tass. And spend controls are such an important part of making any kind of digital transformation work. Steve, you or your plant wanted to mention something?
Yeah, I'll ignore the plant. But it's this morning, it's very timely, because I put together a quick meeting to talk about something that had come out of an audit recommendation, and that was around the way that we handle complaints or manage complaints. And we'd immediately gone straight to the solution that we could possibly employ. So whether that's SharePoint, whether that's Uniform as a line of business application to handle the complaints similar to the way that we handle FOIs. And actually what we should have done, and what we can do, because this is a timely piece of conversation, is actually step back and look at it from a user perspective and understand what do we actually want, because then we can start to look at whether we want to go down the SharePoint route or whether we want to buy an off-the-shelf like iCaseworks or something similar to that. So this has been a really useful exercise just to stop and think.
Fab, that's great. James, you've been sort of nodding and smiling and things. Did you want to offer some praise?
No, I just agree with a lot of things that are being said. I'm kind of thinking, how do you define what's, so it's quite noisy here, how do you define what's appropriate for intranet and what's not? Like, I find it hard to, I tend to look at our intranet and I just kind of assume that, okay, that's the stuff that goes there, but it's a really interesting point that some things don't actually belong on there. But I was wondering, how do you go about justifying what should and should not be in that kind of internal space?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I suppose it depends on how much time you've got, as much as anything. But I think once you've done this really, really high level sort of view on it, in terms of, you've basically got some options there that you can start looking at. I mean, it's fairly arbitrary, I suspect, in many ways, but at the very least, what it enables you to do is start to make some decisions. So what you could even do is, if any of these bits are contentious, is just then to do a bit of a proper options appraisal on it. How much hard work would it actually be to get SharePoint to do the document management thing properly, and for people to actually sort of behave themselves when putting things in there and updating them and stuff. And if it turns out that actually that's too much hard work, or we just can't we can't see how it's going to sort of operate well, then maybe you just choose another way of doing it. But I think it's just a worthwhile exercise, even if you end up doing the thing that you would have done anyway, at least you've thought about it a little bit, and you just think about some of those user journeys. I mean, one of the interesting ones I think, or I always think about, you know, again, we don't need to necessarily make this all about intranets, but it's a useful thing that we all understand, is that whole thing about sort of linking to the core corporate applications and things like that. So the classic example is there'll be, on most intranets, there'll be a big button somewhere to take you through to like the HR and the finance system. But how many times when you click on that, does it actually take you to a web page on the intranet that tells you about the finance and HR system, which you then have to scroll to the bottom of in order to get to the thing you actually wanted to do in the first place, which was to book some holiday? You know, so oftentimes, even once you've made these decisions, it's still thinking about those user needs helps us to decide the best ways to actually sort of implement them and actually sort of make them work in terms of that user journey. I just wanted to pick up on a comment that Tass threw up in the chat, which is quite an amusing sort of side point, really, but where Tass sort of mentions the fact that what's really needed on internet is a good way of doing search. I mean, absolutely. That's a clear thing that is needed. But I just wanted to share that I did do an internet project a few years ago now with it was with the central government department, and there we did some research in terms of what were people searching for on the internet, and what do you think the most searched for word was on this particular intranet? Anybody got any guesses? Google was the most searched word for on the internet, right? So, you know, that gave us, the first thing we did was put a big button on the homepage to say, you know, click here to search the internet. But what do you think for that department, what do you think the second most searched for word was on that internet after Google? Goggle. So it was actually a misspelling of Google was the second most sort of searched for thing. So, you know, but it's all this kind of stuff that you just never think of, that, you know, actually for a number of people, for whatever reason, you know, and we shouldn't necessarily sort of blame the users for this, they struggle to discern the difference between being on the staff intranet and the outside world internet, and sort of making, you know, what's our job? Is it to teach them the difference, or is it just to sort of manage their journey as smoothly as possible to be able to get through that sort of journey? So hopefully that's been sort of useful running through that example. I mean, as I say, we've got the templates there to try out. Just interested, before we go, just talk quickly with folk about other than intranets. What has anybody got anything? Steve, you just mentioned you've got a thing coming up. Was it around complaints? Did you say around, you know, how we could use this? That is a really, really good example, because quite a few councils in particular, I think, have basically, sometimes they buy off the shelf thing. You mentioned iCasework. In Croydon, we've just implemented a thing. It's an appalling name, but it's called Infreemation is what that's called. So it might be worth sort of Googling that. It seems to go down quite well. But quite a few councils also have rolled their own sort of complaint systems, and they've just used internal forms and workflow to do all of that. I mean, others just use spreadsheets, of course, which probably isn't to be advised, I dare say. But has anybody else got any sort of projects coming up they're thinking of applying this method to, that they want to share?
Yeah, I'll kick it up. We're obviously looking at an intranet, but alongside that, we're looking at a learning management system at the same time. So it's like, how do we marry the two? Because they definitely won't take the user journey route. And the other big problem we found with the intranet and the websites, fully mature, owned by several service areas and delivered by our digital services team. But the intranet, nobody seems to want. So I put my hand up, and I'm working communications, I worked in IT and communications. I put my hand up, because if you haven't got somebody leading on it, steering it, if you try and manage it by committee, it just doesn't work. We've tried that twice. We end up with what people want on there, not what they need. So like videos and forums, blogs, but nobody writes anything in the blogs. Nobody comments on the forums. It's all driven by us anyway. So that's what we're going to try and set up as champions, to try and get services to embrace it, and me as the lead, sort of coordinate everything. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to try my best. So
yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. I think with all these things, you know, start with the minimum viable product. What's the least number of features and things you can have in there? If people end up screaming for a forum or something because they really need that level of interaction, then but then maybe slowly introduce it. But there's nothing worse than an empty forum, as the comments section on my website will attest. But no, you're absolutely right. And then I think on the learning management side of things, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much really cool stuff in the learning tech space at the moment. But the trouble is you've got to have the people there to be able to make use of it. And I think that, learning tech is one of those things where it's really hard to produce good online learning content, as I've proven this morning, I dare say. But in terms of like producing e-learning courses and stuff, that takes so much time to produce that content and stuff. And before you even start thinking about doing cool stuff with technology, you really need to think about, well, actually, who's going to generate the content for this thing, to actually sort of make it useful. Maybe just allow people to access YouTube and Google for stuff and, look stuff up themselves might be the easiest way and the cheapest way to get around that. Tass, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to say, last week we got the news that Warwick District will definitely be merging with Stratford District Council. So we, as part of that, we've got the fun of, there are lots of systems that we've got. So tech capabilities, tech options that we've got. And Stratford have got lots too. Stratford have a way of their dev team, just basically they're good developers, so they write everything. They've got tons and tons of in-house written stuff that one or two people can support, and then Warwick District tends to buy things. So there's going to be quite a lot of discussions, I think, about this is stuff that we want to do. What have we already got across the two councils, and which is the better one? And then we have a fight, don't we? A bun fight about which one we end up with. But anyway, it'll be a great laugh. Can't wait.
I'm sure it will be. The sort of proliferation of this stuff across single organisations is bad enough. You've got that problem squared in effect, haven't you? Because you've got sort of two councils coming together, likely with very, very different ways of doing all of that. Okay, great stuff. Well, fab. Well, hopefully that's been useful to everybody. As I said, what we'll do is I'll do my best to remember to save the chat as well, because there's been a few bits shared in there, which is quite useful. So a bit later on today, I'll share with you the recording of this, a copy of the slides, links to all the various posts and templates and stuff, as well as a copy of the chat and things. And it'd be really interesting to find out if you do sort of use some of these techniques in the future, to let me know how that works, and maybe we can sort of take a look at that and share some of those stories around. But do keep in touch. If you I publish bits most weeks on Sensible Tech. If you want to take a look at those, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Dave Briggs on there, or just bung me an email if you've got any questions or anything like that. I'll be more than happy to help. But I think that's probably it for today. So hope that's been fun and useful, and I'll see you all again soon. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
See you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Everyone.